What did the 18th century Enlightenment thinkers really want? To free humanity from the shackles of superstition? Or to undermine faith in God itself? In this video, we trace the remarkable transformation of the movement, from pious scholars like Descartes and Locke to the radical atheists of the French Revolution. The term Enlightenment itself implied a transition from the darkness of ignorance and superstition to the light of reason, science, and knowledge. The fight against superstition had begun long before the Enlightenment, for example during the Reformation, which saw a significant decline in superstition. This was not something new or revolutionary, but a continuation of these earlier efforts to purge improper practices and beliefs. However, it was generally more typical for the Enlightenment to advocate a purified religion than to oppose faith in God altogether. The forerunner of the Enlightenment, Descartes, was a deeply religious man, and hoped that his philosophical research would be useful to theologians. One of the first Enlighteners, John Locke, published a treatise in 1695, The Reasonableness of Christianity, in which he claimed that Christianity was the most reasonable of all existing religions. He spoke out against fanaticism and advocated religious tolerance. The scientific discoveries made during the Enlightenment had a huge impact on society and gave weight to their claims. At this time, the solar system was truly discovered, with the orbits accurately calculated, and the mass of the Sun using Newton's theory of universal gravitation. John Tollnad, Lord Shaftesbury, and others believed that Christianity was not mystical, but could be proven by reason, and that what could not be proven by reason should be rejected. The first generation of Enlightenment figures was largely made up of members of the clergy. For example, in Poland, priests made up 40% of the leading thinkers and activists of the time. This phenomenon is often called the Catholic Enlightenment. In addition, there was a Protestant Enlightenment, which developed in countries with a Protestant tradition. Don't forget to subscribe. Write comments, like. If we talk about the fight against superstition, the Enlighteners did not always approach this directly. They believed that knowledge itself would defeat superstition, so from the very beginning they promoted the idea of secular education. The Enlighteners believed that religious schools educated students in dogmatism, rather than reason and science. Polish priest Hugo Kołłądź played an important role in the creation of the first Ministry of Education in Europe. But the call for secular education may not have been so much a fight against superstition, but rather a tool for expanding state control. During the Enlightenment, many monarchs used the ideas of the Enlighteners to centralize power. Another way to spread knowledge was the creation of books and reference books. For example, Denis Diderot created the Encyclopedia, which explained scientific and philosophical concepts. The true goal of Diderot and other authors was to combat religious traditions and ignorance. The idea is promoted that only knowledge allows a person not to blindly obey authorities, such as the king, religion, or army. Some Enlighteners also directly fought specific superstitions. For example, Pierre Bell debunked the idea that comets foretell a catastrophe. Benjamin Franklin in 1752 conducted a famous experiment with a kite to prove that lightning is an electrical phenomenon, and not a manifestation of God's wrath. The development of chemistry as a science refuted many alchemical superstitions. Christian Thomasius made a significant contribution to the abolition of torture and witch trials. But in general, the witch hunt weakened not because of the Enlightenment, but because of the complication of the judicial system and the centralization of power. During the Lisbon earthquake of 1755, critics accused the Church of using such tragedies as evidence of divine punishment for the sins of humanity. It became a catalyst for the scientific study of natural phenomena. The concept of where the fight against superstition ends and the confrontation with God begins is difficult to determine because the line is blurred. From a scriptural perspective, the fight against superstition was not always perceived as a primary task, since according to the teaching of Christ, the final separation of truth from error will occur only at the second coming, and before him shall be gathered all nations, and separate them one from another, as a shepherd separates his sheep from the goats. Matthew 25 verse 32. The Enlightenment was the work of an elite, of intellectuals, while the majority of the population continued to exist in conditions of economic backwardness, social inequality, illiteracy, and the dominance of traditional religion. Their religious criticism rarely went far beyond the circle of philosophers. The Enlightenment thinkers were largely functionaries, officers, bureaucrats, university professors or ministers of the crown, and their activities were linked to the interests of the state. Gradually, atheistic tendencies grew among the Enlightenment figures. This began mainly after the Glorious Revolution of 1688 and caused a conflict with the Anglican episcopate. John Toland in 1696 in his book Christianity Without Mysteries, declared that the Bible was partly a forgery created by men. He was forced to flee to Ireland and compared his persecutors to the Inquisitors. The original Protestant claim against the Catholic Church is based on the authority of Scripture. However, during the Enlightenment, the authority of Scripture is strongly questioned. The development of natural science makes the acceptance of a literal version of the Bible increasingly untenable. Authors such as Spinoza propose ways of interpreting the Holy Scripture according to its spirit, not its letter. Deism arises, with the book of the philosopher Tyndall considered to be the Bible. This book argued that the universal religion of nature had been perfect and unchangeable from the beginning, and that historical revelation added nothing to this religion. Deists generally rejected the divinity of Jesus as contrary to reason, while embracing him as an outstanding moral teacher. Voltaire brought deism to France. In the Jewish Enlightenment, Moses Mendelssohn, Marcus Hertz, and others fought for the separation of religion and state while integrating Jewish citizens into German society. Many of the founding fathers of the United States authored statements or treatises that were sympathetic to deism. In his Bible, Thomas Jefferson excluded all passages concerning miracles, angelic visitations, and the resurrection of Jesus after his death, as he attempted to extract a practical Christian moral code from the New Testament. Thomas Paine rejected the Bible, in part because he considered much of the bloodshed in the Bible morally indefensible. Deism received a crushing blow not from theologians, but from the Scottish philosopher David Hume, who showed that reason was not as reasonable as deists believed. He also strongly criticized belief in miracles, especially biblical ones. The philosophers of the Enlightenment were more opposed to the power of the Catholic Church than to the monarchy, which represented stability. They wondered whether a society consisting only of atheists had a chance of survival. For Pierre Bell, Chinese society proved that religion was not necessary for morality and virtue. The first open atheist, Baron de Holbach, appeared among the Enlighteners. Many secretly propagated unbelief, like the Abbé Jean Meslier. Voltaire rejected radical atheistic conclusions, defending deism. He was an opponent of any fanaticism. Observing the persecution of French Protestants by Louis XIV, he considered them immoral and a permanent taint on the Sun King. Voltaire adopted Locke's views on religious tolerance and devoted his works to promoting them. Jean-Jacques Rousseau's ideas developed Voltaire's views and played an important role in the rise of the Counter-Enlightenment and Romanticism. Defending religion as the spiritual and moral foundation of society. Over time, the Enlighteners themselves became the source of many misconceptions. Some reduced Jesus to the idea of a solar myth. Franz Anton Mesmer created the pseudoscience of mesmerism. It claimed that there was a special force or animal magnetism that could influence people's health. Emanuel Swedenborg claimed to have gained access to the heavenly realms and communicated with angels and spirits, creating his own religion. Secret societies emerged, such as Freemasonry, the Rosicrucians, and the Illuminati, who believed that God was the secular architect of the universe and condemned religion as vulgar superstition. The Jesuits, traditionally champions of the rights of the Church and the papacy, found themselves under intense criticism from the Enlightenment. The religious orders' excessive role in the universities and their monopoly on general education, which led to the best talent being channeled into ecclesiastical careers rather than into practical science, were discussed. Pope Clement XIV, under pressure from Catholic monarchs and Enlighteners, formally issued a papal bull that dissolved the Jesuit order throughout the world. The political result of the Enlightenment was the French Revolution. Its violent excesses, especially during the Reign of Terror, fueled a serious reaction against the Enlighteners. Counter-revolutionary conservatives such as Irish politician Edmund Burke, French Jesuit Augustin Barruel and others argued for a close connection between the Enlightenment and the French Revolution. Burke criticized the Enlighteners for their anti-church position and disdain for tradition, believing that such ideas could lead to the destruction of social and moral foundations. Thus, the early Enlighteners sincerely sought to cleanse faith from layers of prejudice, superstition, and abuse. But the process they launched gradually went beyond the original framework. Leave comments, share your opinion and suggest how to make the content even better.